I've got my stitches on here. I'm using thicker wool again, just so that you can see it better. And I have my inside all lined up, so I know it's not twisted. And I've got my stitch marker there, my wee blue piece of wool, that's acting as a stitch marker. And I'm just going to start knitting here. And while we're talking, I'm just going to knit one round, so we can see what happens when I get back to the beginning of this round. This is actually the first round, so it's always a bit tight. I'd like to hear about how everybody's getting on with their headband, even if you haven't started it yet. You're still in the inspiration process of choosing your colors or whatever. So who have we got now? Beth, how about you?
I've got two on the go at the moment. I started the provisional cast on, so I'm doing one your style, but my style, which is splitting the headband lining into 2 lots of 15, I'm doing for a neighbour who has requested the colours of Hibernian FC for his headband. So it's in bottle green and white. And I'm on the 5th row, but I'm using my method, which I know is slow with the colour compared to, I think, the one that you're going to show us, which is the holding a yarn in each finger, which I'm looking forward to trying. But I've just done a few rows using my old method, which is actually just keep on picking up each colour separately, you know, in the right hand.
Good. Okay. And so when you say you're doing your lining in 2 halves, how are you joining it then? Are you stitching it or grafting it together?
It's a stitch that I use for jumpers, which is an invisible seam stitch. So it actually provides a really good, you don't actually see the join at all. And it's not, you know, it would worry me if it was like an overlap stitch, which would irritate somebody's ears. But this is actually that the seams become hidden. It's like a French seam with sewing, you know? Yes.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing just to get started on that Hibernian one. But I'm doing one for myself using that, the technique you showed us last week.
The provisional cast on.
Yeah.
Did you use waste yarn or did you use a needle?
Sorry?
Did you use waste yarn for the provisional cast on, or did you use another circular needle?
Yes, I did. And I bought another circular needle, but I couldn't actually figure out how to do it with a circular needle.
You just need to imagine your other needle is your waste yarn, basically.
Yeah.
So just treat it as if it was.
At the end.
I'll show you again later if I've got enough needles and time here.
Yeah. I mean, it's not.
You can always go back and watch the video too, can't you? So next on my list, or a row of people down the right-hand side of my screen here, is Marianne.
Yeah.
How are you getting on with yours?
Well, as I said, this is my 7th attempt. 6 of those were using the 2 needles with the provisional cast on. I've never done this before, so I just learned from your video. And various things were happening, twisting, it was too tight, all sorts of stuff. And then I also had the 2 rows that's sort of purl and knit. I was doing purl and knit, but
yeah, that was an odd one.
Yeah, I think I've just do knit. Is that correct?
You just knit. Yeah. So I'm just going to show you here. Actually, I am just getting to the end of my round. I have I've only cast on 88 stitches here because I just wanted a multiple of 22 because the pattern is 22. But
can I just reassure Marianne that I ripped out so many, so many tries. So 7 tries is nothing, dear. I mean, honestly.
Not bad. Well, I've even soaked. I've got these old needles of my mother's, and they were all twirled up. I've even soaked it in hot water, thinking maybe it was to do with the needle.
Your needle looks quite big, Marianne. So you see, mine is, this is a 40-centimeter one.
Yeah. I've got 2 in here. I've got a 40-centimeter and an 80-centimeter.
Right. Okay. So you're knitting on your 40 and your 80s in your provisional.
Yeah.
So here I am at the end of my row, and you get this kind of funny little stitch just because of the provisional cast on. So I'm knitting my last stitch. I am slipping my stitch marker over onto the right hand side, and then I am just continuing to knit, because you're always going in the same direction, round and round and round, and you're effectively knitting a spiral, and so you never need to use a purl stitch. And in traditional Fair Isle knitting with 2 colours, you will, I think the only time you'd ever see purl is maybe if you were doing a plain colour rib band or something like that, you know, for a cardigan. But even no, I'm not even going to tell you that because it's just going to confuse you. But you're always knitting in one direction, and so you're only ever using a knit stitch. And this also makes it easier for our continental knitting, because it means you don't actually even have to learn how to do the purl continental stitch. You only need to learn how to do a knit stitch with your left hand, because that's all you'll need for the purpose of this headband anyway. So Barbara, what about you?
Well, you know, Karen, I'm still being inspired.
Good, that's great. I'm glad to hear it.
And once Percy has got used to me handling needles, I'll maybe have a go at casting on.
Yeah, when she can train Percy to stop juicing the wool.
Yes.
So I'll stop sharing my screen because I can't see everybody else. Who else is there? Annette. You've knitted a few already.
Yeah.
Lovely.
It's a sort of mint and wine colour, but it's sock wool.
I like that one. It's like a tea colour, is it?
It's variegated turquoises.
Yeah. So here's my knitting, and what I'm first of all going to do just with one colour is show you how I do the continental knitting. So this is how somebody in France or Germany, but not Portugal, because apparently they do it differently. But this is how they would just knit a normal knit stitch. So whereas we would normally have the yarn in our right hand, and if you learned it the same way as me, in through the rabbit hole, around the big tree, out through the rabbit hole, and off goes she. Instead of which, I have got my yarn in my left hand, and I'm going to show you first of all how most people do this and how you'll see it in the video. So you're hovering your yarn below your left needle, you're going in through the needle, you are picking up your yarn in the same way. To me, it's kind of similar to crochet. You're picking like you do in crochet, and you're using your other finger to get that pick through. Now, I actually find that a bit fiddly. So what I do, and I don't know why everyone else doesn't do it as well, is I put the wool over the front, over the top of the needle, and I just go like that. So I use my needle as my second finger, if you like.
Oh, do that.
So I'm in, and then I'm under the wool and I'm off.
Could you do that slowly, please?
Sure. So my wool is just in front of the stitch that I'm about to knit. I'm going into the stitch from back to front, and then I'm just picking up that yarn and I'm pushing it off. Did you get that?
No.
So the yarn's in front of the needle, in back to front, take the yarn, and to me it's just obvious how you do that. So you go under that stitch, but then over the yarn. And
I can't do that. I can do the other one.
Well, you do whatever works for you. If you know how to do the other one, or if you've practiced the one when it's behind the needle, and if you're a crocheter and you're probably used to that kind of picking motion from behind the needle, like that, where you're going the other way. So you're going sort of around this wool, you're going from right to left. Whereas the way I do it, you go from left to right over that wool. Did you see that? I'll do that again. So when your wool is behind your needle, you're still going into this stitch from back to front, but you're going over the top of your yarn. Whereas the way I do it, going in from back to front, but going that way, kind of clockwise rather than anti-clockwise. One more time. I'm just looking at this to see if it makes any difference to the direction of the stitches on the needle, you know, the bit that you've actually knitted, and I can't see that it does. So I've knitted those alternately in different ways, but they all look the same to me. So I don't think it makes a difference to the appearance of the knitting.
Karen, when you do it your way, do you use any other fingers to control the wool?
The wool, no, but the needle, yes. So I'm resting my needle on my middle finger. All
right. Okay, so I just rest the wool when it's behind the needle.
Yeah, on your middle finger.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in my method, I'm resting the needle and the wool, but for some reason, I find it easier to have the wool in front of the needle. I just find that much simpler, because I go in and then the wool's just there. I don't have to look for it on the back of the needle. It's for some reason, it's difficult for me to pick it from the back of the needle. I'll do it one more time. But you can see when I'm doing it, I'm quite clumsy with it because I just don't knit that way. So here I've got my wool at the back of the needle, and I'm going in and I'm picking it. But it doesn't come through as cleanly either somehow. When I do it that way, I find that difficult. But when it's in front of the needle, it's shaking. It's just a lot more natural movement for me to take it from the front of the needle.
I think that is easier. Saves the finger.
It saves you poking your finger as well. Exactly. Yeah. I was going to say that, Mary, when we mentioned about hurting the end of your finger. You're not always prodding the needle into your finger. Whereas when you're picking it, because you're using this finger to, using this middle finger to kind of pick up the wool, so you're always poking your needle into that finger.
Yeah, the needle acts as a sort of fulcrum to get it through.
Yeah, yeah, yes, exactly. It is. It's kind of, it is like a levering motion. It's like a rocking motion almost. You're kind of just rocking your needle backwards and forwards so that the yarn goes through.
I don't seem to be able to get the tension of my...
Well, that is always tricky, Beth, so don't worry about that because you're not used to having the yarn in that hand. That's something that is going to come with practice. If you're a crocheter, you probably are used to tensioning your yarn in your left hand, but you just need to practice so that you get that. In the same way you have to practice your typing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to, this is obviously my main color. It's the only color so far. I'm going to introduce a second color. so that you can see how it works when we're knitting with two colors. So I've chosen this dark purple just because it is a good contrast. It's a purple and black. These are from the Jamieson's Shetland Heather range, the Aran Weight. I can't remember what this one's called. I want to say it's called Simmerdim, which is that solstice period in June where you just get this kind of twilight all the time. I think it might be called Simmerdim, but I can't quite remember. And I don't have the label. So I always, from laziness and because it's easier, when I'm putting a new color in, I'll just knit it the old-fashioned way, just to get it on the needle. But then I will take my contrast color to my left hand, and I will keep my main color in my right hand. And there's a good reason for that, which I'll come back to in a minute. So you can see I've got this wool just the same as I had it before. I'm going to knit, let's say, we'll do 3 and 3. So I'm going to knit 3 purple, and then I'm going to just let that fall off my finger so it's not getting in the way, but I keep the tension on it, and I knit my 3 white. And then I'm back up with my purple in front of the needle, and I'm knitting my 3 purple. And then let that fall. It kind of falls away just naturally. The wool falls off the needle when you're not using it. And then I'm doing my 3. So you notice I'm using the old style of knitting in through the rabbit hole for the white, but for the purple, I'm using my continental knitting with my left hand. And on the back, what you will see is, and this is important, these bits here that are going in between, you can just about see the white ones there. So when I'm knitting a purple stitch, my white is floating along the back of those stitches. And when I'm knitting white stitches, my purple is floating along the back of those. Now, can you see there that the purple is below the white?
Yeah.
So the white is up here and the purple's down below it. And you can see quite clearly that the purple float is below these white stitches, whereas the white float is pretty much on the same level as the purple stitches. So when you hold a yarn in your left hand, that is the effect that you get. It will always be below, and it becomes your dominant color. So because your float is lower, there's more yarn. Basically, you leave a bit extra yarn on the float that is lower than you do in the one that is higher. And you can also see that, you know, you can just see from your eye, there's more purple yarn there than there is white yarn. And because there's more at the back here, that means that some of that excess, when you've blocked it and, you know, evened out all your stitches, some of that excess will pull through into these colored stitches. So these stitches will end up bigger. And because they're bigger, they're slightly more obvious than the other color. So that is the dominant color. So if you're wanting to achieve an effect where you have got a dark color standing out on a light color, or vice versa, you want the color that you want to stand out always in your left hand. Oh. Now, if you knit with 2 colors in one hand, which I'm not recommending, but some people do. I think, Sheena, I think you do this.
I do that.
And you're quite adept at it. And Beth, you obviously are as well. You've been doing it, and you know what you're doing. Some people have the white on, or the one color on one finger and one color on another finger, like that. But what you want to make sure is that your dominant color is always to the left. So you don't want to be switching them around. You don't want, if you put your knitting down, to pick them up the other way, so that you've got your purple to the right and your white to the, you always want your dominant color to the left, whether that is in your left hand or sitting on a finger to the left of the other yarn. Now I'm going to show you, because it's kind of almost hard to believe that this makes a difference, but I'm going to show you, hopefully you'll be able to see this, that it does. So this is just a tubular scarf that I knitted. It's actually grafted together at the end, not very beautifully, I have to say. I don't think I pulled it tight enough. I think that invisible stitch that you're talking about, Beth, would have been better.
Yeah.
But this is only 2 colors, and at some point, and I can see it, I'm not sure if you can, I was probably, I don't know, on one gin too many or something, and had my brown wool, which was my main color, in my left hand instead of my right. And you can see, can you see just here?
Yeah, there's a big difference.
See a line.
You can see a line going down there where for no more than 2 or 3 rows, I had inadvertently switched my wool. And I remember thinking at the time, oh, that's not going to make any difference. I'm not going to rip that out, because it was quite a complicated pattern as well, and I couldn't be bothered. But if I'd known it was going to look so obvious, I would definitely have gone back and ripped it out. As it happens, it's almost directly opposite the back.
Oh, right.
So when I put it on and twist it, you can't see it, or I can't see it because it's at the back. So it's not the end of the world, but it is very obvious. And so this is an example of why you have to always keep your wool in the hand that you started it in. Don't switch them around. Yeah.
Karen, in that case, is your dominant color the white or black?
It depends on what kind of effect you are trying to achieve. Now, let's turn this the right way up. So here, I would say the color that I would want to be dominant is the color that is the outline of the diamond.
That's the dark
blue. Yeah, dark color.
So, but this one is knitted the other way. Sorry, this one here. So in this, the orange was in my left hand. And you can see, I think to me, that's the back of it, so we seam there, but I think it's fairly obvious there that the orange is standing out more than the blue. I know it's a brighter color, but it kind of, it's almost like a 3D effect to me. You know, the orange jumps out at you, whereas the blue doesn't. So you really need to decide that, Beth, before you start. If you were knitting this, would you want the blue to stand out and the orange to be more sort of in the background, or would you want the orange to stand out? And if I knitted that again with the 2 yarns in the different hands, the effect would look not massively, you know, it's still going to look like a blue and orange headband, but there's going to be a noticeably different effect, particularly in this area. With the 1, 1, 1, 1, I think it's not quite so obvious. But look at the size of those stitches, though. I mean, you can really see there that the blue stitches,
yeah, they look smaller.
They look much smaller than the orange ones, don't they?
Yeah.
And actually, if I had knitted the orange in my right hand, the orange would not have stood out there nearly as much, because the blue stitches would be overshadowing them, wouldn't it? So I think it's a question, there's no right or wrong. It's just what effect you want to achieve. And if you were doing something, maybe a more traditional pattern like this one, just with 2 colors, if I had knitted that the other way around, if I'd had the brown in my left hand as my dominant color, my pattern wouldn't be standing out so much. There would be more of a, I would say it would be more almost hazy. The pattern would be less distinct. And it would probably also be beautiful, but it would be a different scarf. Yeah. It would just be a different look. It would have a different look. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, see, I'm trying to do this left hand color, Karen, with your suggestion of the yarn at the front. And how do you know when you what is the order of you putting the yarn at the front? Do you knit into the stitch and then put the yarn at the front, or does it happen at the same time?
I put it over. I believe I put it over before. Let's just check. So I'll do. I keep hitting this camera with my hand when I'm knitting. I'm just going to move it over a little bit, so I've got less chance of working it. I've just remembered Mark told me to put something white or black down on the table so that the knitting could be seen more easily, and I forgot. Sorry, Mark. So I'm immediately taking that over to the front before I start, Beth.
Before you start, right.
So that yarn has been slack, and what I'm doing is I'm sticking my finger under it and I'm just bringing it over the front of the needle, and then I'm going under it basically.
Oh yeah, I can do it better that way. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
How's everybody else getting on with it? Who's practicing? Mary?
I think they've all hit the bottom.
Well, I've stopped it now because I'm trying to speed up and finish this lining. But yeah, that was definitely working better with putting it over the needle first.
Good.
So I need just a wee bit more practice with that, and I'll try. I've knitted Fair Isle a few things, but I've not.
An invention then. Should you maybe put this on YouTube, darling?
Yeah, yeah. We'll probably be Buchanan stitch.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, what were you saying, Mary? You've not used the 2 hands before?
No, I tried it, but I always was just too keen to get on and knit whatever I was knitting.
Yeah.
So I've always tried to keep the same wool, the same sort of relative positions of the wool. So one always on top, one always below. But it's interesting to know about the way that you're keeping it to the left makes the stitches bigger. I never knew that before.
No, I didn't.
That's something to try.
Yeah, and experiment with it. You know, do some swatches and see how the effect differs. What about you, Sheena? How are you getting on? Sheena?
Sorry?
How are you getting on?
I'm all right. I'm just having to do pearl rows with 2 colours because I didn't knit round in a circle. So I'm knitting slowly for me. But I'm fine. I'm going to stick with my way. I found with the Continental, with carrying a wool in your left hand, that somebody mentioned finger ache. If I don't use my finger as a guide, I get finger ache. You know, if you watch them doing it very fast in real life, they don't use a finger as a guide. And they just wiggle their left finger, and that makes left forefinger, and it just makes me very tired. I get then trying to do that.
One that finger thing, whatever it's called, that Sheena has, is used quite a lot in Norwegian knitting because they do not always stick to 2 colours per row. So Fair Isle is only ever 2 colours per row, whereas in Scandinavian knitting you can sometimes have 3 colours in a row, and that's when that finger thing comes in handy.
The Icelandic knitting too, Karen, all slopey jumpers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just dropped a stitch.
Morag, are you knitting with us?
Yes, I am. And for me, it works better for the left to do it almost like crochet. I have tried it the other way, but then I ends up in the wrong needle. So definitely doing it crochet style. So I go in and then I pick up the wool. I find that quite quick.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I suspected that anybody who crochets would find that.
So is it the case, Karen, that the way I do it, which is the colours both on the right side, the colours then become equally dominant?
That's a good question. It's hard to know, because if you are picking up your wool each time,
yeah.
And I guess you're going like this. Are you twisting it though, or are you always picking it up from the same?
I'm always picking it up and like I hook it over one finger, but then always I pick it up with the right hand to knit with. You know?
I don't know. It would depend on how you're picking it up, how you're picking them up in relation to each other. But what to do is, if you look at the back of your knitting and look at your floats, you should be able to work that out. So if your floats look like mine do here, where you've very clearly got one above the other in each row. So these floats are from the same row, but the purple ones are below the white ones. You'll be able to tell which is your dominant color. Your dominant color is the one which has the floats at the bottom. And if you always have the same color at the bottom, then you're fine. But if you are alternating colors at the bottom, then you are mixing your dominant and your main color.
Oh, right. That's interesting.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to tie in, weave in, is that the right term? Your floats. So if you have got more than 3 stitches, I mean, that's already quite a long float there with 3 stitches, especially for the dominant color, which is longer anyway. So I would not want my floats to be any longer than that, but sometimes in a pattern they are. And in the Gairloch pattern, for example, I think there's one row where you've got my ruler. So at the end of row 14, you've got 3 blue stitches here, and then you've got another 5 following it immediately at the start of row 15. So that's an 8-stitch float, and you just wouldn't. In the case of the Gairloch pattern, it actually technically doesn't matter because it's sandwiched in the center of your lining. So you're never going to catch your finger or your ear on it, and nobody's going to see it. But it is potentially going to pull, you know, even from the other side, you could pull it, and the stitches might just be a bit looser, or it's good practice to have shorter floats. So I would always make sure that my floats are never any longer than 3 stitches. And it's very easy to do that. So I'm going to knit here. There's 2 different ways to do it. The first I'm going to show you is, what we're going to do here is, let's see, I'm going to knit over to here. And we're going to do 1, just to sort of even this out a bit. Right. So what we're going to do now is, instead of 3 and 3 and 3 and 3, I'm going to do 5 purple, 1 white, 5 purple, 1 white. In fact, yeah, okay, let's do it that way first. So our float is going to be our white yarn. It's going to be going along the back of our purple. Let me just do the stitch in the white. Right, so I'm going to do 5 purple now with my left-handed method, but on the third one, I'm going to stop the float basically and start it again. And how I'm going to do that is I'm putting my needle in the right-handed way. So I haven't got my yarn at the front. I'm putting it in as if I'm going to knit it with the white yarn. And I'm going to put the white yarn around it as if I was going to knit it. But then I'm going to bring my purple back again. And I'm going to take my white off over it and bring the purple through as normal. So that's given me a purple stitch, but it has tied my white float in underneath that stitch. So that when I do another 2 purple here and back to white, you will see there are 2 white floats there with a little V in the middle where I've tied it in. So we'll do that again. I'm doing 1 purple, 2 purple, and on the third one, I'm going in as if I'm going to knit a white stitch. I'm pushing my white yarn around, but then I'm bringing my purple back over, taking off the white and bringing the purple one off the needle. It's maybe a bit hard to see because the yarn is so dark. I'll try and get a bit closer to the camera. And I'll do that again. I'm going to try and do this whilst watching it on screen instead of watching it on the needle. So this could be interesting. Right. So,
and I think part of the problem is it's quite jerky, the film. Sometimes it skips. Well, it does with me.
Maybe that's the internet. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've got my 2 purple. And then I'm going into the third one, starting it like a white stitch, but then finishing it, sorry, it's just fallen off this needle, finishing it like a purple stitch. I will do that another time. I've got an odd number of stitches here because of the number I've cast on. So 1, 2, this is my last stitch now here. In like a white stitch, white round the needle, purple back over, and take your purple stitch off. That's my stitch marker, which I don't really need. So I'm going to take it off because it's getting in the way. And my other 2 purple. So we can maybe come back to that in a second, but let me show you how to do it with the white now. So I'm going to, I'll knit over to here. Right, so now I'm going to do 5 white, 1 purple, 5 white, 1 purple. So the good news is this is easier when you're tying in the yarn in your left hand, you're tying it in as a float, but you're knitting the color in your right hand. So I'm doing again two stitches in that color, and then all I'm doing is I'm bringing this over the front of the needle to make sure that it gets knitted in to that stitch. So let me just go back and show you that. So rather than knitting the white with this one out of the way, I'm bringing it up over the front of the needle so that it gets knitted in. You can see it getting knitted in underneath the white yarn there. So that's a lot easier. Did you get that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my 1 purple, and then back to another 5 white. 1, 2, and then bringing the purple yarn up. It doesn't have to be on the needle, it can just be on your finger. But the important thing is it's not at the back, it's at the front. So the 2 yarns are actually crossing over. Sorry. Your white is crossing over it. As it goes over the left-hand needle, it's crossing over the purple.
That looks a lot easier than when you hold them both in your right hand, because then if you twist one like that, you're trying to find out, at least maybe I was doing it wrong, but I always had to do the same again, but a different way around to keep them, to maintain the top and bottom of the different colors. So that looks easier because it keeps them in their same position, same relative positions.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not quite sure how it works, but it seems to avoid the problem I had.
See, well, you can see there that where I've knitted that in, it has momentarily taken the purple up and down again.
Yeah.
And you can see it with the white here as well. So it's more momentarily taking the white down and up again.
Yeah, but then you got your threads coming out either side. So you're back to, because you got your wool coming out either side, left and right, you're back to where you were before.
Yeah, yeah.
So it sorts itself out.
It does. So would anybody like a repeat of anything there?
No, it's practice.
Practice.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one with the purple is more difficult. It's easier to forget, let's say. Whereas this one is just crossing them over basically, and it's intuitive. You can tell when you've crossed them over. Whereas this other one with the 1, 2, the thing you have to remember is always to go in with the wrong color first and then take it off again. So I'll do that again, and 1, 2, and then round with my white, over with my purple, back with my white, and off with my purple. So if I had a float that was going over 8 stitches, I would do that twice. I would do it every 3 stitches. If I have 7, I would just do it once in the central stitch. So I'd have 3 either side of it. But I would never have a float of more than 3 stitches. Some people might, and I think also it could depend on your yarn. So you look at this, because it's thicker yarn, the 3 stitch float looks quite big. Whereas on this finer yarn, there's a 3 stitch float there, and you know, it doesn't look that big. So if I have a go, I'm going to put the thicker yarn to one side. I don't know how well I'll be able to see this. This is this mess that I had last week. Do you remember? It was that autumn color and the pink.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't working. The contrast wasn't working.
Could you move it over a wee bit, please?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to get the stitches back on the needle.
Yeah.
Falling off in transit. I always stop a couple of stitches before the stitch marker so that I don't lose my stitch marker. So it's now purple and pink. And the contrast is fine.
Mm-hmm.
So which color would you say I have been knitting in my left hand? Purple or pink?
Pink. Oh, I was saying pink.
Pink.
Pink. Anybody disagree?
I thought it was blue, actually.
Have a look close up at the stitches.
Oh, it's pink, yeah.
Yeah, so the pink stitches are much more obvious, aren't they? They're really sticking out more. So the pink has been in my left hand. So we'll put it back there. Fine cut again. Now I don't know where I am here. I've got 3, 3, 5, 3, 3. And I'm on my way up the triangle. So it must be here. I'm at the end of row 9. So I've got one more purple to knit. And then a pink and a pink. I don't know about everyone else, but doesn't matter how many times I knit this pattern, I never really seem to get it very well into my head. I can usually do up to here, up to this row at the bottom, and then I lose the plot and I have to go back and look at the thing again. But it's actually, you know, logically, it's really straightforward, because what is happening is your 1, 1, 1, 1 stitches down here are getting fewer and fewer until they tail out. And then at the same time, your 1, 1 stitches in the middle are getting wider and wider. And then you just do the opposite. So the fact that I can't get the hang of it is not because the pattern is particularly complex. I think it's just because my brain doesn't work that way. So I showed you this little magnetic board last week, but I also recommended Chartminder as a way of keeping track of your what row you're on. And one of the things that you can usually remember when you're doing this 1, 1 is that you're always starting with the same color that you finished on the row before.
Yeah, that confused me a wee bit, because I thought that it would look a bit weird having 2 colors the same, like it would interrupt the pattern a wee bit.
Yeah. But when you look at it, and it does a little bit. So here, for example, there's 2 purples.
Oh, yeah.
Hang on, wait. Next to each other here, and 2 pinks. So that is going to happen, because effectively you're knitting a spiral. Yeah. So that pink stitch there is only very marginally higher than the pink stitch before it. So they do sort of look like they are next to each other. But that's just the way it is. Right, so I am now knitting. Let me see. Should I be knitting? I should be knitting. I think I must have got.
Oh, I'm going to have to go soon.
In the wrong row. I should be on this row. Okay. Stitch marker back on. So I've finished with a pink and I'm starting with another pink. 3. I'm just showing you in practice. My 2-handed knitting with the purple and the pink. I'll just knit a couple of iterations of the chart. So that's my 1, 1, starting again in the middle. Now, you can imagine if you're knitting with your yarn, in your 2 yarns in the same hand, and you're switching it over like this. When you've got all these 1, 1, 1, 1 stitches, that must be kind of a pest.
It drives you nuts, yeah.
Whereas when I'm doing it 1, 1 here, all I need to do is just knit with the other hand.
If I could perfect that, it would be brilliant, yeah.
It changes your life when you perfect that. And it's all the knitting wool getting all muddled up, and it's
yeah,
just bliss.
So I would definitely encourage you to practice this. Just have a go at it. And you know what, if your headband ends up a bit wonky, doesn't matter. You rip it out and start again. Or you can just put it down to experience and start another one. But I would say, if you, by the time you have done 31 rows of a Gairloch pattern with one wool in your right hand and one wool in your left hand, you will be well on your way to getting the hang of this.
Well, I never thought I would manage that provisional cast on. And I'm really impressed that I managed it myself while watching an old black and white movie, I have to say. And, so, yeah, Marianne, keep on going.
Yeah, thanks.
I think I read that the left-hand one is looser than if you do it in the sort of what we'd call normal, continental way is looser. And looking at the lining I did, the third of it that I did that way looks slightly looser than the rest of it.
Oh really? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a little bit wiggly.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I would have assumed that was up to your individual tension, but maybe it's not. Maybe the knitting technique makes a difference too.
Yeah, it said that in that little clip something I read about it.
Yeah. So actually, there's an idea there. Sorry, my thing is making a noise on the table here. But if you wanted to practice the continental knitting by itself, just to get the hang of that, you could actually try it in your lining in the continental knitting.
Yeah, that's what I was doing, and it was easy practice.
Yeah. Do the whole thing in the continental knitting.
Yeah.
It's funny because I don't. And if I'm just knitting plain knitting, if I'm knitting the, for example, the lining of one of these or anything else that would just be in stocking stitch, I don't use continental knitting. And I think, Sheena, you asked me about this not long ago, whether I did or didn't. And I think the reason I don't is because typically when I'm knitting, like you, Beth, I'm watching TV or, you know, I'm not just sitting looking at my knitting. And I guess I'm so practiced in the English style of knitting that I can do it without looking. So I can just watch the TV and keep knitting. Whereas if I'm doing the continental knitting, I have to keep looking at what I'm doing. But I think it's more than that. I think, well, maybe it's just me, but when I'm knitting the English way, I can feel what I'm doing. So I can feel my stitch that I'm about to knit. I've got it between my finger and thumb. I can do it with my eyes closed. I'll show you. So I can feel that needle. I can feel it's in there. I can feel that's gone round, and I can feel I've pushed that off. I could do it with my eyes closed. But the other way, the continental knitting, I can't see what that yarn is doing.
Yeah.
With my eyes, I can't feel it. I just can't feel it the same way.
And the stitches can drop off the left needle very easily if they're too close to the end when you're doing that. Well, it did for me in the continental one. So you need to be always looking at it.
Yeah. So I think, I don't know if that would ever come with practice, that you would get the same, you know, intuitive, you can feel, you can do it with your eyes closed in the same way that you can type with your eyes closed if you get practiced enough. But for me, I'm not there.
I think as well, there's a, if you were taught like I was by my mother, I was taught when I was only about 5 or 6 years old to start knitting. And I think, you know, that's the way she taught me. And there's a wee part of me thinks it's almost like a betrayal if I start knitting a different way. I know that sounds illogical. But for ordinary knitting, I think I will still stick to
The tried and tested.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The fastest knitter in the world, Hazel Tyndall, knits in the British way.
That's right.
Shetland knitter.
Yeah.
Because if you're really fast at that, it's like 2 movements for almost 1 movement.
Do you remember when Kirkhand Weave were on the go, that there was a lot of women in the area knitted for Kirkhand Weave, including Mary Tippett? I remember her doing a lot of the knitting in there.
Yeah.
And it would just be lovely to see them knitting again. You know, they obviously did. That was her main income when she was bringing up her children.
I have been to talk to her about that actually, and because we have 1 or 2 bits of knitting, of more recent Kirkhand Weave knitting from the time when she would have been knitting an iron sweater, for example, but she was able to look at it and tell me that it wasn't one that she had knitted. She remembered all the patterns, and you know, she remembered how it all worked. Yeah. But I mean, if it's your job and you're doing it all the time, then of course you're going to be good.
And you see these amazing pictures of the fishwives from in Fife, hauling their fish on their back and knitting as they're walking.
Yeah. Or carrying the peats home and knitting at the same time. Bare feet as well.
Or with a knitting belt to hold the end of the needle.
Yeah. And the men had such a hard life, eh?
They carried out to the fishing boats.
Okay, thanks very much.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you very much
for joining me. That was lovely. And see you. Happy
night.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.